Today, I would like to talk about women in the Dharma. And I'll begin this with talking a little bit about Gyalwang Karmapa, that he has said that we all as human beings have feminine and masculine qualities. And that in the 21st century, what is needed is for the feminine characteristics to be dominant over the masculine characteristics. In Buddhism, wisdom is considered feminine, and skillful actions are considered male. So that's what he's talking about, that we really need to have more wisdom in the world today. And less actions that are not guided by wisdom, because there's plenty of that, more than enough of that. And it's important to know or to remember that mind is mind. There is no female mind and a male mind. All minds are basically equal. And a mind that had a male body in one lifetime could have a female body. And because of this, it's one path on Buddhism to the goal, which is enlightenment, that there's not a path for women and a path for men. And in Rinpoche's transcript, which I'm just bringing a few points out, the transcript is titled Women in Dharma, but he begins by talking about the culture that the Buddha was born into. And it was a culture that was very stratified according to caste. And then you had men up here and women down here, almost subhuman. And the Buddha tried to, you might say, erase that system. He took birth in the highest class, but he renounced it and became a wanderer and a beggar. And this was the lowest class at that time. And he did then start a monastic tradition, and he opened it up to both men and women. So that's an important point. The Buddha did not try to separate men up here and women down here. He tried to bring them together in terms of status. When we look at the history of Buddhism over time, including in Tibet, there still is this cultural distinction. And of course, we all see many more male teachers, male Rinpoches, and so forth than women. But Rinpoche felt that there was this equality, and that was what was most important. And I can tell you from my experience as Rinpoche's student, is that he did not differentiate between his male students and his female students. I have not sat down and did a count of how many male lamas he recognized and how many female lamas he recognized after completing a 3-year retreat. But there are a number of very good female lamas that Rinpoche has bestowed that title on. And at the 3-year retreat center, he chose a man to be the Drupan for the male retreat. This is Lama Sotram, and he lives out there. And he chose a woman, Lama Lodro, to be the Drupan for the female retreat. But later, he also chose a second woman to be a Drupan for the women's retreat. And you know her. I believe her Tibetan name is Zangmo, and she came from the Minneapolis KTC. So Rinpoche, he definitely wanted to have women be lamas and wanted them to travel the path and have the teachings and the practices and everything else that he was trying to transmit available equally to men and women. And this is my own observation, that devotion to a teacher means that you want to become like them. And of all the students of Rinpoche that have gone through the 3-year retreat, the one that, to my observation, and I just have ordinary vision, but to my observation on the outside, the one that looks most like Rinpoche is the Lama Lodro, the female Drupan for the retreat at Karmaling. Very knowledgeable, very kind, compassionate, and a very good teacher. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about the importance of mothers in Buddhism. And in Rinpoche's transcript, he says he thinks it's very, very good for this country to have a Mother's Day honoring mothers, that it's really important for us to honor our own mothers and mothers in general. Now, the common contemplation in Tibetan Buddhism is to look at what a mother goes through, specifically your own mother, to bring you into the world and then to take care of you. And so from the point of conception until birth, it's more or less the mother's responsibility to take care of that baby inside of her. The father has very little to do other than perhaps to help take care of the mother. But it is the mother that carries the child for 9 months. It is the mother that experiences all kinds of difficulties. And I was married, and my former wife and I had a child, and so I got a firsthand look at what a woman goes through for those 9 months. I remember her sleeping a lot, morning sickness, being tired, awkward, and on and on and on. Oh, a woman that has given birth can explain this much better than me, but it's not necessarily a comfortable situation to be in. And then birth is painful for both the child and the mother. Rinpoche said, by the way, that it's fine if the mother chooses to have medication to reduce the pain. There's nothing wrong with that. That natural childbirth is not necessarily better than the standard Western procedure. And once the child is born, then the child needs constant attention. And it is usually the mother that spends more time caring for that child than the father. And I will interject at this time that not all mothers are the same. Some mothers are better mothers than others. It's the same thing in the animal world. For whatever reason, some mothers are better than other mothers, and some fathers are better caregivers than other fathers. But as a group, the mothers tend to do more caregiving than the fathers. The fathers, of course, if they are, you might say, traditional fathers, will be the ones that are making sure that both the mother and the baby have enough to meet their needs. So from the point of birth on, the mother feeds the baby, takes care of the baby when it needs to be cleaned, when it eliminates waste, whether it be urine or through the intestines. The mother pays a lot of attention to the child, and if the child is uncomfortable, crying and so forth, will try to comfort the baby. And it's a full-time job for a long time. And as the child gets older, then there's training, whether it be a potty training or learning to speak, and so on and so forth. That there's just lots and lots of things for a mother to do to bring that child up. And especially in the beginning, there's very little, you might say, positive feedback. I remember my former wife being up at all hours of the night and day because of giving care to the baby, feeding when he was crying, comforting our son, and so on and so forth. That the mothers do a huge amount of things for their child. And Rinpoche said that it's really important to recognize this. He says, we must make our mothers feel special. And so here's a quote of his from that transcript. Recognizing your mother's kindness, those of you who are fortunate to have your mother still living must learn to appreciate her, learn to love her, make sure to make her feel special. And I remember Lama Karma once saying that in Tibet, your mother was treated almost like a deity. And Rinpoche says, and of course, if your mother is dead, it's important to dedicate your practice to her. And even before you start practicing, to think of her and include her in your practice. And this contemplation is a core of the Tonglen practice, which is taking and sending. And it's a practice to help us develop compassion for all beings. And it starts out by thinking about what your mother has done for you, all of this and much more, and realizing that she is still suffering, that she doesn't want to suffer any more than you do, but she is still suffering from various things. And you, on the basis of this contemplation, you increase your desire to remove her suffering and give her happiness. Now, for some people, it's difficult to do that because there is at best, I'm going to use the word a strained relationship. Sometimes it can be much worse than that. And in that case, you take another object of compassion that you care for more. It could be a grandmother, grandfather. It could be a child that you have had. It could even be a pet. And I had a difficult relationship with my mother when I came to Buddhism, and I used my grandmother, who was very kind to me, and so forth. But as we do this practice of Tonglen, we gradually start having the object of our compassion and love to be more distant to us. And if you have a difficult relationship with your mother at some point, then you put your mother in front of you and again, take on her suffering and give her back your happiness. And this can really help you appreciate your mother more. Break down the barriers and the negative feelings that you have. And this is one of the practices in Buddhism that I found extremely helpful because it helps us let go of our various emotional obscurations, little by little, weakening them, and eventually they dissolve, they come into our minds, but we let go of them rather than hanging on to them. And so the teaching is that in a past life, and we have had countless past lives, that every single sentient being has been a mother to us in a previous lifetime. So by doing this contemplation and by doing Tonglen, we gradually develop more and more compassion for more and more beings. And this is a very powerful way to travel the path towards enlightenment. I came across a news article, I think it was yesterday, and I'm going to post it in the chat box. This is a story about, it's a great Mother's Day story. This woman did not know that she was pregnant and got on a flight from the mainland to Hawaii. And about 3 hours away from landing in Hawaii, she started having stomach cramps, went to the bathroom, and to her surprise, gave birth to a premature baby. And of course, she got in contact with a flight attendant who came back, saw what was going on, and then she, on the public address system, requested medical people to come to her, and a doctor and 3 nurses that were vacationing together, who their job was neonatal intensive care. And between those 4 medical people, the baby survived. And the baby ended up in a hospital in Honolulu right after the landing. And I think they said that the birth happened after about 29 weeks of pregnancy, so it was significantly premature. But I thought that was a good Mother's Day story that you have. First of all, what are the chances of giving birth in a plane? And then secondly, having the proper medical professionals there who didn't have all the equipment they could have used if they would have been back in a hospital, but they were able to make do with what they have and so forth. And it was successful. So it's good to think about these things. And His Holiness Karmapa has said this, that there is no difference between male and female in terms of mind, which is what Rinpoche said too. And even the identities of male and female have no inherent existence, that they're just constructed identities. The subtitle of one of his chapters in The Heart is Noble is, "It's all in the mind." And one final, this is both a contemplation and an observation. And I have been going to a lot of doctors and other healthcare professionals in the past year. And when I call up to make an appointment, it's always a woman that I'm talking to. And almost always, if it's walk-in, the receptionist is a woman. And then a nurse comes out, and the nurse is almost always female and checks your blood pressure, your weight, height, and on and on and on. Does an interview. And then the doctor comes in, and he's usually male, but I've had female doctors too. And it's this way over and over and over again, that in terms of the people that I see, the vast majority of them in healthcare are females. So imagine if women were not allowed into the workplace, or were somehow or another, we couldn't, you might say, access them. It's really very heavily female at most levels. Also, interestingly enough, when I've been doctoring up in the Twin Cities at Fairview Hospital System, many of the women are either immigrants, or I was up Thursday and the woman had a Hmong name, but she was young, and I'm sure she was born in the Twin Cities. She had a good Minnesota accent. But anyway, women play a very important role in my healthcare, and I really appreciate them. So I thought that I would talk briefly about some important women in Tibetan Buddhism. The first one I want to talk about is Yeshe Soyal. She died in 817, and the date of her birth is not really known. But she became a consort of Padmasambhava, who was from India and brought the Vajrayana teachings to Tibet. Padmasambhava is considered the father of the Nyingma lineage, and there was only one lineage at this time. And Yeshe Soyal is considered the mother of the Nyingma lineage. And actually, she is considered a Buddha, that her level of realization is much more important than that she was a consort of Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. She is also the first Tibetan to attain enlightenment. So that's a first for women. And among other things, she herself concealed Dharma. And I am going to post a book that is a biography of hers. At least I'm going to try to post it. I think this is it. Let's see here. Yep, there we go. This book is Lady of the Lotus Born, and it's a biography of Yeshe Soyal. And if you want to learn more about her, this is a good reference to go to. And she had a lot of problems. The very fact that she was a woman, that she ran into obstacles as a result of that from men. But she persevered. And so the next person that I want to talk about is considered an emanation of Yeshe Soyal, and this is Machek Labdron. And she lived from 1055 to 1149. So she lived into her late 90s. And she too was in the Nyingma tradition. And what she is most known for is that she is the founder of the Chod tradition. And this is a practice that is referred to as cutting through ego. So here is a quote about this practice: a radical synthesis of the Prajnaparamita tradition and the Tantra Guru Yoga that cuts through the ego. I won't go into it too much right now. It's an advanced Vajrayana practice and 3-year retreat. It is taught. And Lama Sotram, the Drupan for the 3-year retreat, he teaches this at KTD from time to time. She had a consort. The name is Topa Bhadra, and he was Indian. And I think this is an important point about her life, is that almost all of her children took to the Dharma like a duck to water, became monastics and great teachers, except for one son. who became a thief. And on the other hand, later he became her student, and again then progressed on the Buddhist path. And here is a quote of hers that this both sums up the Chöd practice, as well as, I think, the relationship she had with that wayward son. Quote, "You may think that gods are the ones who give you benefits and demons cause damage, but it may be the other way around. Those who cause pain teach you to be patient. Those who give you presents may keep you from practicing the Dharma. So it depends on their effect on you, if they are gods or demons." And she was what's called a non-returner. And that was, she was so highly realized that she had emanations rather than rebirth. And she stated this before she died, that she would not take a rebirth, that she would have emanations. And there are a lot of, since her parinirvana to the present time, there are a lot of emanations of hers that have been recognized. And one of them is Sopran Alone, who is still alive, and she is a Western practitioner. And she has a few books out too. So I thought it might be good to explain a little bit about the emanation body. And so these emanation bodies can be whatever form that it takes to tame beings. And so they can be a human, an animal, it can be even inanimate, an object, whatever it takes to benefit beings that are suffering. But it takes a high level of realization. You might say she had been also was a Buddha at this point. And as a result of this, she was free of karma. And when that happens, you can choose to emanate and choose all kinds of things, where you're going to emanate, who your parents are, and you have complete control over the whole process. The Karmapa is so highly realized that he always leaves a letter behind predicting when he will be reborn, where he will be reborn, and frequently his parents' name and so forth. So this is the difference between an emanation and a rebirth. We ordinary beings are reborn, but here these highly realized beings choose to either be reborn or not to be reborn. Then the third important female in Tibetan Buddhism, and this is not a complete list, by the way, but these jumped out at me as women that I think would be good to talk about, is Gyalwang Palmo. And she is the nun that started the Nyungne practice. So I thought it would be good to talk about her. She came from Udayana, which is where Guru Rinpoche was born. And she never went to Tibet. She stayed in India. And she is described as, when she was young, being very beautiful and had suitors that came from noble families, not noble in terms of Buddhism, but royalty. I think that's maybe a better word. And she turned them all down and became a nun and practiced Buddhism diligently, Vajrayana Buddhism. But because of her past karma from past lives, she developed leprosy. And gradually her body got worse and worse and worse. And she got rejected by everyone, just like in the Bible. It was no different than that. No one wanted to be around her. They were afraid that she would give them this disease. It was incurable, and it was incredibly painful and ugly to boot. And so she became on her own. And at one point, and she had tremendous devotion to Chenrezig, Avalokiteshvara was the Sanskrit name. And this was before, since she never made it to Tibet, it would have been Avalokiteshvara to her. And at one point, she came to this shrine room, a monastery, and she wanted to go in and practice in front of the Chenrezig statue in the shrine room. And they wouldn't let her in because of her leprosy. They told her, go up behind where no one can see you and we'll let you practice there. And so she did. And practiced diligently and with lots of devotion. And eventually the Chenrezig statue in the shrine room did a 180-degree turn on its own and faced her due to her devotion and her faith. And at that point, they realized, oh, she is not an ordinary being, and they did allow her in. So anyway, she continued doing practice in other locations and practiced fasting and doing the long Chenrezig mantra that we do in Nyungne. It's a Dharani, actually. And eventually she had a dream of Chenrezig. And he poured Amrita on her. And she dreamed that her disease and the disfigurements and so forth fell off of her like a snake shedding skin. And when she woke up, she was cured. Well, she continued to practice, and she continued to practice. 8 Naga kings came, and she bound them with Samaya to protect Nyungne practitioners. And this is why when we do Nyungne, we have a smaller shrine that is for these Nagas that are protectors of the practice. And this is why at the end of a Nyungne, there are certain things that are taken and offered to the Nagas in a body of water that is close by, because these Nagas are protectors of the practice. And it goes back to Gyalwang Palmo. Gyalwang, by the way, means a fully ordained nun. So she attained the 10th level of the Bodhisattva path and became inseparable from Chenrezig. There are a lot of other miracles that I'm not going to go into. There are many stories about her. In the book, The Buddhist Fasting Practice by Wangchen Rinpoche, he goes into depth about her too. And I don't have the link for that. But with this, I am going to Gyalwang Palmo lived in the 11th or 12th century. I could not find an exact date. The question is about Chondro Rinpoche. And in a previous life, she was a consort for, I believe it is the 15th Karmapa. She is presently in the Nyingma lineage, and I think her previous incarnations also were in the Nyingma lineage. There's a close relationship between the Nyingmas and the Kagyus. And it's been this way for a very long time. And I find it refreshing where much of that time there has not been the secularism of my branch of Tibetan Buddhism is better than your branch of Tibetan Buddhism. They're just different ways of teaching and practice. But I do not know if there is a long lineage and that if she is the incarnation of a great teacher in the past. The questioner first made a statement about Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, telling her that the relationship with her mother is the one that she needs to work on most of the issues that she talked in this one interview, which kind of goes back to what I had said earlier about Rinpoche. So then the question was, do you have any advice for working with a difficult mother besides Tonglen? And I'm going to speak from my own experience here, bringing in also teachings that I have heard. What helped for me, and I had a very difficult time with my mother from early childhood. Coming in contact with the Dharma really helped. Meditating really helped me to not have, when a emotion of anger or pain or whatever else related to my mother came up with meditation, it got less strong, it got weaker. And I became more tolerant. And she was still a very difficult person to be around. And I'm going to jump ahead, and then I'm going to come back. But eventually, what I came to realize was when I was working in the prison is that she behaved very similarly to inmates that I knew that had been sexually assaulted as children. And mom was very paranoid, frightened. And this is what motivated her the most, was fear. And she could not even talk about herself very much. If she wanted, let's just say, a glass of water, she would look at Dad and say, "We want a glass of water." She couldn't even say "I." And she slept late every morning. And so now going back, I have a very strong feeling that she had a very traumatic childhood and was deeply scarred by trauma. And of course, it had never been addressed right up until the time she died. So what I did even before I came to that realization was, again, work on not being so reactive. Also, from the time that I went off to college, I spent only short periods of time at home. And when I say short periods of time, just a couple of days, uh, because way back then, I knew I couldn't handle it. I knew that it would just set me off. I knew I would be miserable. In fact, I didn't go home for 29 years. Yeah, 29 years I did not go home. But Mom was so attached to me that she would come and visit me. And I never did tell her, no, you can't. But she just was so afraid that I was going to do something wrong, and she loved me so dearly, but it didn't come out as love. But she kept visiting me with Dad, on and on. And then finally, after doing a 3-year retreat, I had the, you might say, the courage to go visit them. Again, a very short visit, just a couple of days. I drove all the way out to Colorado and spent a couple of days and drove back. I think I spent more time on the road than I did visiting. And don't put yourself out so far in terms of your exposure with your mother or father that you feel regret for having done it, or that your anger is getting the best of you. You know, do what you're capable of, and then maybe push yourself a little bit further, but realize your limitations. And of course, always have aspirations that you can have a better relationship. And with my mother, what gradually happened is I gave up trying to change her. And that allowed me to shed a lot of negativity, where this is the way she is, nothing I can do about it. And it was true. Nobody could do anything about it. Even Dad, he just accepted her the way she was. And then, like when I was when I became a vegetarian, it really drove her crazy. I'm supposed to eat meat. And so by this time, she had the beginnings of dementia. So I would put a plate when we were eating together, a small plate next to my plate, and say, well, Mom, put the meat here on here and I'll eat it later. And of course, I never ate it. But, you know, if I would have said no and pushed back, then it would have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. This way, she got to feel that she was helping me her way, and I didn't eat meat. And here is an interesting story about her, and that is that she grew up in a Lutheran family down in Madison, Wisconsin. And she wanted my older brother to be a doctor, and he became a doctor. And she wanted me to be a minister. And when I became Buddhist, it totally freaked her out. And then I had to gradually work up to her, knowing that I was going to do a 3-year retreat. And on Rinpoche's advice, I said, well, they're building a 3-year retreat center. Just left it at that. Then maybe 6 months, 9 months later, oh, you know, I'm thinking about, there's a pre-retreat program. I'm thinking about attending it. And on and on and on like that, and never saying I'm doing a 3-year retreat. Meanwhile, well, I am doing everything I can to prepare for it. So then I went in, and she was totally convinced that this was going to be bad. She never could voice her feelings, but she would send in through the mail like clippings of that Waco standoff where all these people were killed. And so obviously that was a concern that we were stockpiling weapons and cult and da 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 da. Well, now fast forward, I got out. I'm a monk. She still loved me, and she doesn't say she wasn't happy, but she had to accept it. And then probably 6 years later, I was invited to do a chapel service at a college that was in the same town where she and Dad went to college. And that weekend, they were at this other college, St. Olaf, a good Lutheran school, attending some kind of an activity there. They were donors, and so they were invited. And then Mom said, can we attend your chapel service? We're not going to participate. We're going to sit in the back of the room. So they did, but it was a very small room. And at the end of it, I walked over to her and she was all excited and said, oh, you're a minister. I always wanted you to be a minister. And what I had done was lead Chenrezig. And, this didn't make her sane, by the way. She was delusional. About this time, or maybe a few years later, she told me in front of her husband, my father, they planted a camera up my rectum and have been watching me ever since. And I think she felt this was done in the early 70s. This is what you call delusional. But for whatever reason, after doing Chenrezig, suddenly that layer of fear dissolved. But if I would have tried to argue with her, it would have been like arguing with these donkeys across the road from me. She wouldn't listen to me, and then there'd be a lot of noise.